Songs are indeed a wonderful thing. They can influence us positively in special and unique ways. Maybe you've been driving down the road and you've seen someone in another vehicle. You might have happened to look through the windshield. Oh, and they're just going away. They're singing their song, driving along. I've even seen people at the stoplight and they're just bopping all over the place so much, I'm pretty sure the vehicle is wiggling. Maybe some of you have done that too. And if I ever catch you, I'm going to smile and wave. And if you're having an especially good time, I'll probably honk just to make sure I got your attention. Songs do influence us in special ways. This sermon is also on a song. It's on the song that we just sang. It is the third and final of a mini-series that I began back last year. The first one being the song Almost Persuaded, written by Philip Bliss, who died at an early age in a train wreck. But if that didn't get you on your seat when we read the account of Herod Agrippa and Paul, then we had the next sermon, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Knowing that Jesus is indeed our best friend and that his arm is outstretched, and all you have to do is but grab hold to it, and he will pull you up to his high refuge, a safe place, a safe haven. The next step in this sermon is to realize, to recognize the assurance that we have in the promises of God. And there is one scripture that has been the theme for all three sermons. Colossians chapter 3, verse 16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. You see, songs are more than just singing along as you drive down the road. Singing in worship is a very special thing. We can see in this verse that the object of our singing is who? To the Lord. We see that the purpose of the singing here is to teach and to admonish. And how do we teach and admonish each other? With grace in our hearts. And how do we know that this will be successful? How do we realize success as we try to implement this verse? We know that we will be successful when it dwells in us. When it dwells in us richly. What does that mean? It becomes a part of who we are. Each and every one of us, we have our story and our song that we live every day. And when we make wholesome songs such as Blessed Assurance a part of that story, a part of our walk, of our song, that's when we'll realize success. As Roger mentioned, there was all of these songs that we were singing this morning, including our invitation song, was written by one individual. The words are written by Fanny Crosby. Her real name was Frances Jane Van Alstyne. You might find that in some of your songs too. But her common name was Fanny Crosby. She and a friend of hers, Phoebe Knapp, one day they were visiting. And they unexpectedly developed what we refer today as the song Blessed Assurance. Mrs. Knapp was the one who was composing the music. And she had just come up with this new melody. And she turned and asked Fanny, "What do you think the tune says?" To which Fanny Crosby replied, "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine." The way that story is told, she came up with it pretty quickly. You'll realize in a moment how she was able to do that, because I don't think of titles that quickly myself. That song, the one that we just sang, that was printed on page 36 that year in the late 1800s in a magazine in New York. Page 36, so it certainly wasn't front page material. Fanny, she lived from 1820 to 1915, 95 years. She was an American mission worker. She was a poet, lyricist, and a composer, obviously. She is also known as the most prolific hymnist. She was even above Philip Bliss, who wrote Almost Persuaded. He wrote a lot. She wrote a lot more than he did. She wrote more than 8,000 hymns and gospel songs, with more than 100 million copies sold. She was well known for her teaching, her rescue mission work. She was known as the queen of gospel songwriters. Because she had written so many, publishers were hesitant to use her name on everything because it would seem very unappealing to the reader's eye. So she went under over 200 pseudonyms. They gave her other names so it wouldn't appear like they'd all been written by her. She'd also written more than 1,000 poems in addition to that. The song itself is generally thought to be based and rooted in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart in what? Full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Hebrews 10, verse 22. Full assurance. That phrase, full assurance, in the Greek means most certain confidence, entire confidence, also known as what? Conviction. Full assurance of faith. This of faith part, we know what faith is. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and what? A conviction of things not seen. We see that in Hebrews 11, verse 1. The word faith itself is a pledge, an assurance of belief. Where I work, we have people who explore for minerals in the earth, and they come to me and they want usually to dig a hole in the ground somewhere. And you never know. Some of these people you can trust, some of them you have no idea at all. But the rules say that in order to dig their hole, they have to give something called financial assurance. So they have to give some money up front that in the event they go bankrupt, the business goes out of business, or they just up and run, that I have enough money to put that hole back together. And if they successfully put the hole back together on their own, they get all their money back after the operation is done. With that thought in mind, let's go to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23. Now, usually when we're in Hebrews chapter 10, we're looking at verses 25 and 26. We talk about not forsaking the assembling. We talk about there being no sacrifice for sins if we continue willfully to sin. In order to understand verses 25 and 26 and how we apply those in our lives and with each other, it's first important to have a clear understanding of verses 22 and 23. So verse 23, let us hold fast the profession of our hope without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. Yes, assurance can be a promise. And we see here in verses 22 and 23 that we must have faith. And we all know that faith comes with works. When you look at James chapter 2, verse 20 as well as 26, we see, but wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? For as the body without spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. No, what I am not saying, that works is equivalent to earning our salvation. What this means is that faith in harmony with works, together with works, means that we are what? Actively hoping. The active is the action, the work. The hoping is that part of the faith. They go together. They are paired together. They are one and the same. This means that we are holding fast, that we're practicing righteousness, that we are fully assured that our faith does not waver. Again, Hebrews 11, if you go to verse 6, you'll see, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Some of us have difficulties with this in our lives. We struggle, we stumble, we fall. Let's go back to my work example. I have operators, they'll go out and they'll start digging their holes, but maybe they've done something wrong. And then we have a little talk, they fix it, they get it back together again. Just in the same way that mining operators are not perfect, yet when they diligently strive for the full reclamation of their work, putting that hole back together, their money gets back to them. That money that they paid up front, they get it back. Even if they make mistakes, the point is that they corrected those mistakes. And then what happens? Their work is accepted and they get their money back. Our Christianity is the same way. We are not perfect. We stumble, we fall, we make mistakes. But trust that when we diligently strive to seek Him, when we diligently strive to seek God, we will be accepted by Him. Do not doubt that. We oftentimes, even very devout people, doubt themselves. They just feel, I am not good enough. I keep messing this up. I am just not worthy. Yes, you are. You are worth it. Assurance, that word, mandates and governs not just our behavior, but also our attitudes, our works, and our faith. It mandates and governs our attitudes toward pleasing God. This is not a hollow invitation, brethren. This requires the very substance of our being. Now that we have an understanding of this word assurance, let's go through the song line by line. Stanza number 1, first line. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. How often do you consider and think about heaven? We just got through a Wednesday night Bible series on what happens when we die and considerations of heaven. Without going into the details of that vast topic, there are a few characteristics of heaven that are worthy of noting. We see in Revelation 21 that the Apostle John's vision of the home of the soul is described as a city. It's a place, as you can see in the first few verses of John chapter 14, it's a place prepared for us as God's people. It's a place of incomparable beauty. We see in Revelation 21, there's light like jasper, that the city was of pure gold. The wall foundations were decorated with precious gems. The streets were of pure gold and transparent like glass at the same time. The gates shall never shut, for there's nothing to fear there. There's also no night and no need of a sun because God's light radiates everywhere there. Revelation 21 verse 4, we're familiar with this. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. It's written for us. We can see it written for us in human terminology in a physical way because we cannot fully understand that spiritual side of it. But we do get a foretaste here in Revelation of infinite beauty, of bliss, of happiness, of peace with God. Next line of the song. Heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. I could not exhaust in this short amount of time the number of verses that covers. We know that we were purchased by Christ Himself, that we are washed in His blood, that our spirits come from God Himself, our eternal souls. Heir of salvation. We don't normally think of ourselves as of inheritance of anything except maybe if somebody passes before us. This is an inheritance that does not require someone to first pass away from this earthly life. This we can gain some hope from, that we're not alone in this inheritance either. Consider Hebrews 1, verse 14, that there is such an assurance that even angels minister on behalf of those who are to inherit this beautiful, incomparable salvation that Christ purchased for us. Even angels will minister to us. Stanza number 2 of the song. Perfect submission, perfect delight. Visions of rapture now burst on my sight. There is something very important about how this is written. Submission comes before delight. Don't forget that. Consider Abraham and Isaac, for example. Remember, God promised Abraham that his seed would be called through Isaac. You can see that in Genesis 21, verse 12. And remember when they were going up to the mountain, when he was getting ready to kill his son? Abraham's faith was so great that he believed God was able to raise Isaac from the dead. Did you know that? You can see that in Hebrews 11, verse 19. Imagine the delight as he took that knife to slay his son. When God intervened, providing an alternative sacrifice. Remember the ram? Think about your own lives. Are there times when you feel the walls are closing in and that you're cornered and there really isn't any alternative? And that you feel that your heart would break before you could do what you know needs to be done? Some of you may be experiencing that even now. Think about Abraham. He followed through with complete obedience, even for something that is for us nearly unimaginable. And God provided a way. He provided a way to make it possible. Genesis 22, verse 14. It says afterward that Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Jehovah-Jireh, God will provide. We can see the example of Abraham. What do people see in us when we walk? What is our story? What is our song? Visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Rapture, by definition, is intense joy. That's what that word means. It's interesting, I find it interesting that Crosby here, she speaks of sight. Visions of rapture now what? Burst on my sight. See, she was blind. She could not see. What is perfect delight? After that submission, we get the delight. That perfect delight, we talked about it a little bit this morning in Jeff's class. This is the joy that God gives us in our faith. And no greater joy is there. The next line of the song reads, angels descending bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. Well, I'm a pretty linear person. What were these echoes of mercy and whispers of love? What does that mean? Where's that coming from? Let's take a look at John chapter 1, verse 51. Jesus is speaking here. And he said, verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. The context of this, Jesus was saying this in response to Nathanael's acknowledgement of his deity. So whose echoes of mercy and whispers of love are we hearing? Jesus is the one echoing mercy, whispering love. Can you see that? Can you see that in the Scriptures? Can you feel it in your hearts? Does it not tug at you? Sometimes you resist it. But I can tell you, when you don't resist, when you respond to that tugging, to those whispers of love, to those echoes of mercy, you will go back and you will be on the path to that perfect delight. The third stanza of the song begins with, perfect submission, all is at rest. I and my Savior and happy and blessed. Oh, we see that word submission again. And guess what? It comes first again. We will not see rest without first being submitted to God. Submission, then rest. Acts chapter 17, verse 31 reads, He hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness, by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance to whom? Unto all men, in that he hath raised him from the dead. What does that mean? It means that we too will be resurrected. Romans 8, verse 11. Our souls will live on, the eternal soul. We will endure, and those who are faithful will go to that place of rest. That knowledge should generate happiness and be the blessing in our lives. Remember, we can have assurance that we will be accepted of God, and that assurance is given to whom? To all men. That there is something beyond this life here on earth. It can oftentimes seem difficult when we are struggling with something, when we feel like there's no way out, when we feel like Abraham bringing his son up the mountain to sacrifice, to kill him. Even though he firmly believed God could resurrect him from the dead, he still had to perform a terrible act, it would seem. Something so difficult that it would break his heart before he could actually do it. Our hearts break, do they not? The next line of the song reads, Watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. How many of you have felt lost? Maybe you've been out hunting or hiking, and you've been out in the mountains or in the woods somewhere, and you really got turned around. You did not know where to go. You couldn't find your way back. And I'm talking you're alone. You're probably not fully equipped, maybe not dressed well enough to spend the night. Maybe you don't have enough food and water to make it through the night. And maybe those feelings of anxiety, you're trying to suppress that panic that's welling up in you. You really are lost. You don't know how to get out of this. In fact, some thoughts in the back of your mind are creeping in like, I might actually die out here. Or maybe it's not a physical loss out in the mountains. Maybe you're dealing with a situation in your life where you feel trapped, where you feel like, I just can't get out of this situation and I don't know how. You're truly lost and alone. You don't know that even anyone can help you through this. You just cannot get out. You might be trapped in your own emotions. You may be trapped with a situation, whether it's job-related. You might be trapped in your own mind. You just can't get your mind past something that's really just weighing you down to the bottom. Now, hold that thought and think, what does the inverse of that look like? What does the polar opposite of that look like? Filled with His goodness, what? Lost in His love. How do you get lost in love? I mean, aside from maybe falling in love with somebody, how do you truly get lost in love? Colossians chapter 3, verse 2 tells us how. Set your affection, or your minds, on things above, not on things on the earth. We have to hold our heads high. And I'm not talking a prideful high. I'm talking a high. We are gazing to God Himself. We are gazing upward. Our focus is completely on Him. And you might say, yeah, I've done that. It doesn't really work all that well for me. I'm trying. Keep your head up. Do not lose that gaze. Don't look down. Keep moving forward. Yes, you're going to trip and stumble at times. Trust in God that He will lead your feet in the right path. You do not have to see where your feet are when you're looking up at God and you're moving toward Him. Do not lose that gaze. Keep looking on things above. And when you do that, and when you do not waver in that gaze, when you continually look upward to Him, you will find yourself lost in His love. The chorus of the song is next. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. We talked about that briefly. What is the story and song of your life? There's a children's book series. You can even YouTube some of the videos. You ever hear of Pete the Cat? Pete the Cat, he's just this little black cat. They tell little stories about him. Well, there's one about him and his 4 groovy buttons. And one day he put on his favorite shirt and had these big, round, colorful buttons. And he just loved those buttons so much he started singing his song. And he sung about how he loved his 4 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons. That's how that goes. But what happened with his buttons? Well, one popped off. Oh no! What did Pete do? Did Pete cry? Oh goodness, no. He kept walking along and singing his song. My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons. Oh, and then another one pops off. Oh no. Well, all 4 buttons eventually popped off. And Pete looked down, and what did you think he saw? His belly button. And what do you think he did? Did he cry? Oh no. Pete kept walking along and singing his song. My button, still have my belly button. I know this is a children's story, but there is a lot of meaning for that as adults too, is there not? It's such a simple way to put some very serious things that we deal with in our lives. And maybe when you are feeling down, you can listen to a song like that and think about your own spirituality. Think about the story and song of your life and how your walk with God is going. Are you singing for God? Is your story about God? Can you get back up and just keep walking along and singing your song? Absolutely. Christian means Christ-like. Many of the songs we sing in our worship were written a long time ago by diverse individuals. We talked about Crosby being blind. See, when she was 6 weeks old, she caught a cold. She developed inflammation in her eyes. And what did they do to try to treat that? They actually applied mustard poultice. Mustard in the eyes. Can you imagine the burning? Well, later on in life, Crosby later attributed that mustard poultice to her blindness, though at 6 weeks old, maybe it was congenital. She might have been born with it. It seems like such a sad way, possibly, to have lost her sight. Let me read a quote from her. She spoke about her blindness later in life, and I quote, "It seemed intended by the blessed providence of God that I should be blind all my life. And what? I thank Him for the dispensation." Well, isn't that interesting? She doesn't stop there. She says, "If perfect earthly sight were offered me tomorrow, I would not accept it. I might not have sung hymns to the praise of God if I had been distracted by the beautiful and interesting things about me." It's easy to get distracted when we can see things, isn't it? Maybe we'll get back in the car again, go for a drive down the road again. Maybe you're with someone and you're driving with someone that you are close to, that you love and care about. But because you can see, you're just looking out the window, just whatever's going by, something's going on. But your loved one was talking to you. That person that you care and are close with, they were talking to you. And they said, "Well, didn't you just hear what I said?" And you didn't. You were looking out the window, distracted at other things. when you should have been focused on what the person right next to you was saying. I've done that. I'm sorry. But it's true, isn't it? We can be easily distracted. Fanny Crosby, by the time she was age 15, she memorized the 4 Gospels. She remembered the Pentateuch. She remembered all of Proverbs, the Song of Solomon, and many of the Psalms. She actually had all that memorized. I couldn't imagine how she did that. She didn't have sight. She focused completely on things like that. We give God the glory for our blessings and our hope. Yes, singing does influence us in such good ways. It brings us happiness. And singing along with prayer, we can express our gratefulness to God and His creation and all that that creation contains. Again, I'll ask you, what is the story and song of your life? Let's go back to Hebrews 10, verse 22 really briefly. We'll read that one more time. And if there's nothing that you remember from this sermon, please remember, blessed assurance, Hebrews 10:22. That's the only thing. You don't even have to write that down. Let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Washed with pure water. Many of the expositors, the commentaries, if you will, they explain what washed with pure water means. They'll tell you, they say that it refers to baptism itself. Really, what else could it refer to? Just as the Jewish priests of old, they had to be cleansed before they approached God, and just as those Jews of old had to be washed in order to perform various services in the temple, we too need to be washed in baptism in order to draw near to God in what? Full assurance of faith. Maybe we've been feeling that tugging at our hearts, whether it's something we're struggling in that story and walk of our lives with God. Maybe we're just trying to resist because it just feels uncomfortable. We're just not sure when we take that leap of faith what's going to happen next. Maybe we're struggling with something that just isn't making sense to us fully, but it's weighing on our conscience. There's a reason it's weighing on your conscience. There's a reason for that. And I can tell you from experience, and although my experience compared to some of you is very much limited, I've only got half the time as some of you in here, I'll tell you one thing that I can explain from experience is that when we give ourselves over in submission, when we allow those echoes of mercy, those whispers of love to tug at us, when we do respond to that, just as Abraham responded to God's call, God always provides a way. Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Trust in Him, He will provide. So whether you are struggling in your current song and story of your life, or you're waiting to begin that story and song with God, please allow Him to reach you. Allow yourself the opportunity to respond. You will not regret it. If there's any need, please come forward to start or continue your song as we stand and sing.